it's time to analyse the welterweight title fight, which was between Tyrone Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Now, this fight, it was a rematch, and previously it was adjudicated a draw by the 3 judges. However, this one went to a majority decision, and Tyrone Woodley came out the champion. He is still the champion of the welterweight division, and this leaves Stephen Thompson in a predicament where he needs to decide how he's going to approach his next fight. Is it going to be a stepping stool to a title fight, or is he going to verse someone which draws in a bigger payday for him? Because Tyrone Woodley, even though he is a great athlete, he is not necessarily a huge pay-per-view drawer. The pay-per-views would have been down, of course, with Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson not fighting due to weight management issues on Khabib's side. So the pay-per-view numbers would have dropped, but Tyrone Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson still made good money. But you have to wonder whether this will be the same for Wonderboy Thompson if the UFC decides not to give them the third fight. And to be honest, it's looking like that, because this fight was lackluster in comparison to their first fight. In the second fight, both of them knew what was at risk and what was to gain, which was the gold belt, the welterweight champion of the world. And after 2 rounds out of 5, both of them threw a combined total strike rate of 14. And usually fighters surpass that within the first few minutes of a round, but both of them did not surpass that. And these 2 fighters just tactically picked each other apart without much consideration to the fans. The fans in the arena were booing both of them because the fight was taken at a very slow pace. But it's very understandable considering the strengths that these 2 possess. Stephen Thompson has that range where he has a kickboxing base ever since he was an amateur. He has over 50 wins and 0 losses in his kickboxing career, and he has a wide stance. And Tyrone Woodley is an athlete, so he likes to explode and close the distance. But he was always wary, because if he came in too much of a rush, Stephen Thompson had the tools to neutralize that threat and cause damage himself. Whereas Tyrone had the ability to stop the fight anytime he wanted to. He knew that, but because Stephen Thompson was so on his game and with his kickboxing stance, it's very hard to know when to close the distance. Sometimes it's about analyzing the distance, knowing what angles to throw, what angles to go into, so you can throw punches, kicks, takedown, whatever it is. And Tyrone Woodley only figured out that jigsaw puzzle towards the end of the 5th and final round. 20 seconds to go, and he knocked down Stephen Thompson. I had, up until that point, Stephen Thompson winning. I thought he had good Octagon control. Even though there wasn't a lot of action, I thought that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson was always kind of pressing the urgency to fight, whereas Tyrone Woodley was kind of waiting for an opportunity. So unless that moment happened where Tyrone Woodley knocked down Stephen Thompson, I think I would have judged Stephen Thompson the winner. And it was a very close, razor-thin decision with Tyrone Woodley winning by majority decision. Majority decision means that it's not a unanimous decision victory, like as in all 3 judges score it the same. One of them had it a draw in this case, but the other 2 judges had Tyrone Woodley winning, so he is the majority victor on the scorecard. So where is Woodley going to go from here? Is he going to defend his belt against Thompson? That's highly unlikely, given that the UFC is a business. They need to promote their fights. Both of these fighters will get new challenges. And to be honest, I'm looking forward to that, because you don't really want 3 fights in a row, do you? Even though UFC 209 was a great card, it had many good fights, the fight everyone wanted to see between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson did not take place. This was a huge blow for so many fans. The Russian side of the population, over 150 million people, wanting to see their icon, their superstar, Khabib, fight against Tony Ferguson. This would have been the best lightweight fight in the history of the UFC. Forget about Conor McGregor's win against Eddie Alvarez. Granted, that was spectacular. No one had come up and achieved 2 belts at the same time. However, Eddie Alvarez has a 3-win and 2-loss record in the UFC, whereas Khabib is undefeated with 24 wins and 0 losses, and Tony Ferguson only has a few losses on his record. So, if anyone was to cause the first loss in Khabib Nurmagomedov's career, Tony Ferguson was that guy. Both of them trained super hard, and it looked like the fight was going to happen after twice the fight being cancelled. This was the 3rd time, and with only a few days to go, I think it was only a day to go, the fight was essentially cancelled because Khabib Nurmagomedov had to go to hospital because he was obviously severely hydrated and he had a very tough weight cut to make to 155 pounds, and he got within 6 pounds. He was 161, and that's when he started to have problems around his liver or kidneys. They haven't really mentioned the specifics yet, but Dana White said in his own words that Khabib Nurmagomedov's team went rogue because they didn't call the UFC doctors before they decided to walk into a hospital. They should have gone through the UFC first. And I can understand that, but I can also understand that when you're feeling pains, you kind of want to get it treated immediately rather than going on the phone. But I guess, if you had waited a little bit, it might have played out a bit more advantageously to his health. Dana White said if he actually went through the official processes, that the fight could have been saved. He doesn't know for sure, but the fight could have been saved. And one of the things that happened here is, and if people have had surgeries, people who are listening, when you have a surgery, sometimes they give you IVs just to hydrate yourself after the surgery. Khabib didn't have a surgery, but he went through a similar process here where they started putting fluids into his body. So when that happens, under the drug code that the UFC adopts, you can only use IVs if you have a therapeutic use exemption. Otherwise, the fight is cancelled. And I think Khabib wasn't in the right frame, physically speaking, to fight. He certainly was mentally. Both Tony and Khabib were. And Tony was absolutely devastated when the fight was called off. These guys went to war with each other in the press conferences. And Tony Ferguson was looking very confident, but so was Khabib. And he said quite alluring statements such as, "I'm going to break your face." Tony Ferguson saying, "You're not going to break anything." And it would have just been a great fight to witness, the best lightweight fight ever. So I hope they rebook it, whether that's in 2 months' time. Hopefully Khabib Nurmagomedov recovers well. This brings up, in general, the problem of weight cutting in the UFC. Some of it is to do with professionalism. So whether you're cutting too much weight too quickly or you're just in the wrong weight class and should go up one to make the weight more safely, or it's a case of the UFC needing to adopt more divisions. Personally, I think there are issues with adopting new divisions because the depth of each divisions are then affected, and depth is so important, especially when you have a situation, and this happens quite a few times across the year, more than a few times, where fighters pull out of a fight because of injury, because of a hard weight cut, and the UFC has the option of replacing that fighter or scrapping the card, and even though Khabib Nurmagomedov was out, they were trying to get Michael Johnson, who expressed interest in fighting Tony Ferguson, who Tony Ferguson himself has lost to, but Tony Ferguson rightfully declined the fight. They're different style fighters, and there's only 1 day's notice, so you can't blame Tony Ferguson for not taking the fight. The fight that everyone wants to see is Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. And even though this puts a blight on, the anticipation to it, because we're all saying, oh, that's another opportunity gone to witness these two extraordinary fighters fight, it's an opportunity to book them into a later card, make it a huge pay-per-view show, co-main events. UFC 210 is on the horizon in April, or can do UFC 211. So there's just so many options out there, but it's a case of Khabib healing up and Tony Ferguson, swallowing, his, fight anticipation, because he really wanted to fight Khabib and have a rest, train hard, and then get back into it. Goldberg is out, and they've got Dominic Cruz, Joe Rogan, and John Anik as a 3-man team for the UFC 209 card. This worked quite well. Dominic Cruz is pretty much the successor of Joe Rogan from an analyst perspective. He is a great commentator. He understands the sport of the UFC so well. He is a great fighter and a great student of mixed martial arts. And he's no longer the bantamweight champion, having been dethroned by Cody Garbrandt late last year, but he is still very much relevant to the mixed martial arts scene, and particularly in the UFC. He's one of the best bantamweights ever to compete in the Octagon, and you can tell he knows what he's talking about. So to have Joe Rogan and Dominic Cruz as a one commentary team setup, that is outstanding. You've got two minds which can not only bounce off each other, but they can really expand their ideas and share time on the air. And John Anik is essentially a supporting role for both of them, describing what's happening during the fight. It worked well. I didn't particularly like the last pay-per-view event with Daniel Cormier, because even though he's a good analyst himself, a good entertainer, that was the first time they made the change. And maybe in hindsight, we as fans are not used to that, because we're used to the two-man commentary setup. But they decided to go with three, and it worked better with Dominic Cruz over Daniel Cormier. Dominic Cruz is, like I said, the successor of Joe Rogan when he eventually decides to part ways with the UFC. It's really Joe Rogan's decision. You've heard Dana White say it. Joe Rogan is the best ever in terms of analysis in mixed martial arts. So Dominic Cruz, for the meantime, is getting great experience in pay-per-view events, in UFC events in general, commentating. And it's great to see, because he not only has another career path after fighting, but he has a career path during fighting, which keeps him busy, on his toes. And for a fighter, that can be very important, especially when you can be injured or hurt. To have another outlet is very important, and Dominic Cruz is certainly doing that. Remember that fight. We're going to analyze Johnny Hendricks and George St-Pierre, which took place at UFC 167, November the 16th, 2013. So this was more than a few years ago now, but George St-Pierre has returned. So he's returned to mixed martial arts, and as a matter of fact, this was his last fight. He is taking on Michael Bisping for the middleweight championship. He's going up a division, but his last fight was a controversial decision victory, and it was against Johnny Hendricks. And Johnny Hendricks himself has moved up to middleweight. So Johnny Hendricks has moved up to middleweight, and his last win came against Hector Lombard. And so this fight was very controversial. Hendricks wobbled George St-Pierre on the feet. He caused some real damage. And at the end of the fight, if you looked at both of them and you had like your magnifying glass on, you would realize that George St-Pierre is a lot more swollen and beaten up than Johnny Hendricks is. Johnny Hendricks looked like he just came out of the shower, whereas George St-Pierre looked like he came out of a war. But sometimes that doesn't tell the tale of an actual fight. Sometimes it's about what damage you can take and what damage you can then inflict. It's not all about what you see on people's faces, because the skin on people is different. So, for instance, a cut may open up more easily than another fighter. And some fighters, and it's not just to do with scar tissue or anything, it's to do with an opponent's chin. Some fighters have a susceptible chin where if they are planted with a punch or a kick, they're very vulnerable because their chin doesn't take it well. Whereas if you see Nate Diaz and the Diaz brothers in general, Nick Diaz, their chins, it looks like they're made of titanium. I mean, their chins are rock solid. You saw Nate Diaz took so many punches from Conor McGregor and was able to still be stable and win the first fight, only for Conor to win the second via decision. But Conor McGregor is potentially fighting Floyd Mayweather for a fight. That fight is in the works. Whether it will happen or not, we don't know. But the fight that has happened is between George St-Pierre and Michael Bisping. And people remember the Johnny Hendricks and George St-Pierre fight because it was one of few times we saw George St-Pierre really in trouble. And this showed that George St-Pierre was a fighter because he was in a lot of trouble during this fight. In terms of total strikes, Johnny Hendricks registered 17 more than George St-Pierre over 5 rounds, whereas GSP had 16 more significant strikes than Hendricks over 5 rounds. So even though GSP wasn't overwhelmed, he was put in danger more times than Johnny Hendricks was. And even though GSP was very vigilant of Johnny Hendricks's left hand, which is a weapon in terms of its power, it's so lethal, it still landed, and it landed hard. And Johnny Hendricks is a dangerous opponent for anyone. You have to be very vigilant. And George St-Pierre is, of course, the ultimate professional in mixed martial arts. But this fight proved that no matter how strong you are as a fighter, you're not invincible. It happened to Mike Tyson. It happened to Muhammad Ali. You're going to get a loss eventually. Or if not a loss, you're going to get exposed in some way. But the key here is how you bounce back. And George St-Pierre looked in trouble for a lot of the fight, but to his credit, he took control of the fight and won a very close decision and came out the victor. Will he come out the victor against Michael Bisping? We'll have to wait to find out. Overeem is a very technical and powerful striker, but so is Mark Hunt. Both of them are Grand Prix champions, of course, a huge championship and a well-credentialed one at that, showcasing some of the best strikers in the world. So they're both champions in their own right. And coming into this fight, you knew that any one of these fighters could knock the other one out. In this case, Mark Hunt was the one who got knocked out. It was via a Muay Thai clinch, and Alistair Overeem has been known for that, especially his knees in the clinch. He's got some lethal knees. He's very technical when it comes to striking. Mark Hunt certainly had his moments. When you're versing a powerful athlete, that is Mark Hunt, you can never count him out, and he's as durable as they come. you saw Brock Lesnar inflict some damage on Mark Hunt on the ground, but he didn't care. He kept on coming, and he kept on coming to fight. So it takes a lot to knock out Mark Hunt. So that says a lot to Overeem's prowess, so to speak. And where does Overeem go from here? Previous to the Mark Hunt fight, he lost to Stipe Miocic. He was seconds away from being the champion had he got the guillotine right, but he didn't, and he essentially got TKO'd by Stipe, who Stipe is now taking on Junior Dos Santos in a rematch. And the heavyweight title is very much up for grabs, especially when you have a credentialed striker such as Overeem waiting in the wings. And a win against Mark Hunt is a huge victory. It's the second time he's beaten Mark Hunt out of 2 times. Mark Hunt has never lost a rematch in his career until now. So this was his first one, and there's no shame to it. Overeem's an outstanding fighter, and Mark Hunt is an outstanding fighter himself. So this loss puts a dent on his title ambitions, whether Mark Hunt is now fighting for his legacy, for fun, for enjoyment, or whether he keeps on going towards the title. I think he has about 4 fights left in his current contract. And so he still has a few fights left. Whether he'll take on someone inside the top 10, we have to wait and see. Overeem was ranked number 3 in the world coming into this fight, or in the top 4 at least. So Overeem's rankings, he's right up there, and Mark Hunt is a dangerous fighter for anyone. Even Stipe Miocic, even Fabricio Verdum, it doesn't matter. Cain Velasquez, Mark Hunt can beat all of them. It's just about, what happens on the day. His win-loss record of 12 wins, 12 losses doesn't tell the tale of his whole career. He's had some outstanding wins, and his losses have come against very good opponents, generally speaking. Let's hope Mark Hunt recovers well. Overeem, well, he's going to be aiming for that title. It's the one that he doesn't have, the UFC title. He's got a lot of trophies in his resume, and no doubt he wants to add the UFC heavyweight title to that, whether that is against Stipe Miocic, who he lost to recently, or it's against Junior Dos Santos. He's definitely coming for that belt. Last but not least, Robert Whittaker, one of Australia's brightest prospects, and New Zealand for that matter. He is a great fighter, only about 26 years of age, and he's taking on Jacare Souza. What a fight this is. This is his next and upcoming fight, and Jacare is just coming off a win against Tim Bosic. You may have heard me talking about that on a previous show in one of the pay-per-view events which took place. And Whittaker will be looking to make a huge statement. He's already made a huge statement here in Melbourne, and the world got to see that. He beat Derek Brunson in a thrilling main event. And I was there myself. The crowd was electric. Go back and watch that fight between Brunson and Whittaker. That was an outstanding fight. Brunson put so much pressure on Whittaker, and Brunson coming into this had so many knockout victories in a row, and Whittaker knocked him out. I mean, isn't that just great? It kind of reminds you of George Foreman in boxing, taking on Muhammad Ali. Everyone expected Foreman to knock out Ali, but Ali knocked out Foreman. This fight wasn't quite on that level because Whittaker definitely has that knockout power, but coming into it, Brunson, in my eyes, was the favorite because he is just such a powerful fighter. Whittaker felt that, but he withstood that early storm of immense pressure, immense power, and Whittaker really fired after that. He was just on full autopilot. He was just in, a league of his own in terms of his state. And, that can help sometimes. When you're confident in the ring and you can analyze the fight as it's happening, the opportunities will open up. And Whittaker, to his credit, many people would have folded under Brunson's pressure. Uriah Hall has done so, but Whittaker didn't. And he's versing a very different fighter, though, in Jacare. Just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, because if the fight goes to the ground, Jacare is... How are you going to beat him? He is a jiu-jitsu specialist. So Robert Whittaker will want to keep the fight standing up. But Jacare has some excellent boxing ability as well. So Robert Whittaker really has to be on his game in this fight. Otherwise, the fight can end in any instant, or it can go to a place where Whittaker doesn't want it to. But in the stand-up, Whittaker has every right to be confident. He'll no doubt be working on some jiu-jitsu skills to withstand the onslaught or the dominance of Jacare. Jacare will be aware of Whittaker's strengths, and both of them, in a middleweight sense, are a bit small, not too small, but Jacare is 6'1" and Whittaker is 6 foot. So, the middleweight contenders, some of them are 6'3". I'm talking Chris Weidman, or 6'2", Anderson Silva, Luke Rockhold, but at least they can make the weight without too much danger to their own health. Khabib Nurmagomedov has competed at 155, but he's missed weight now in the UFC 2 times. But Whittaker, this looks like his division. He looks like Australia's next title prospect and possibly Australia's biggest hope, but he's versing a very formidable opponent in Jacare Souza. But best of luck to Whittaker. It will be a great fight, and certainly an entertaining one at that.